Hello, and welcome to BIA's Leading Local Insights podcast, your go-to spot for staying ahead in the dynamic local advertising marketplace. You'll hear BIA's top experts and their distinguished guests break down the trends, technologies, and innovations reshaping local media. Plus, you'll frequently get highlights from BIA's U.S. local advertising forecast. Thanks for tuning in. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to BIA Advisory Services Leading Local Insights podcast. I'm Rick Ducey, Managing Director of BIA Advisory Services, your source for local media market intelligence, insights, data, and strategies to grow your business. Today, we're going to talk about the employment marketplace in the media business specifically. And joining us today, we have Robert Hawthorne, CEO, founder of Hawthorne Search, a firm that specializes in executive recruitment for leadership positions at media and tech firms in sales, business development, marketing, e-commerce, and other high company leadership positions. Robert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
And just to pin our conversation in time, we were just chatting a little bit beforehand. We've come through sort of a weather event that overwhelmed DC for most of 2 weeks. And we're not very good at dealing with snow and ice and so on. But you're in a beach town, and really unusual to face this kind of a weather event.
Yeah, we're down here in Wilmington, North Carolina, which, for those who are unfamiliar, coastal, Michael Jordan's hometown, #1 area for net migration into the last 3 years, but not known for snowstorms. And we had about 8 inches 2 weeks ago.
Amazing.
And we have only the salt that you get at a barbecue joint on the table, so we don't have any road salt. And a plow is really just not even on the radar screen here. So it was a lot of people who don't know how to drive, and all the milk, bread, and eggs, of course, disappeared as everyone makes French toast when snow comes, of course.
Well, there's nothing I love more than a tortured analogy, metaphor, or cliche. So building on the snowstorm and being unprepared, I mean, that is kind of our employment marketplace right now to a large extent. The recent jobs report that came out, I think it showed a good bump, in the employment economy. But if you dig not very far into that, like most of those jobs are healthcare. And what's happening in the media industry, we're seeing industries, looking at compressed margins, looking to reduce expenses. They're trying to grow themselves out of things with revenues. They're trying to do consolidation. There's a lot of good people kind of on the bench now, and uncertainty ahead with tariffs, interest rates. What's the ad spend going to look like? Because that drives a lot of hiring in media, and then the tech companies that support the media. There's so many different forces going on. I mean, so tell us a bit about you and your company and how you're positioned in this space. And I was, we were chatting a bit, like I think it's probably been a couple of weeks ago now, where you were actually getting good signals from the market from a hiring perspective. So maybe there's silver lining in those snow clouds.
So we've been in the media, ad tech, martech, SaaS, digital marketing sandbox for a long time. We grew up in linear and traditional media, even going back to when you all had some amazing local media conferences, in key cities, and back in the Yellow Pages days, the traditional newspaper days, and migrated through the birth and growth of digital into pure play standalone ad tech companies now. So we've seen a lot of transition and a lot of change in the labor market, of course, along the way. We've done over 3,000 placements over the last 20 years. We average over 100 a year, and those range from placing heads of revenue and publishers to heads of digital marketing to product folks to customer success and populating entire sales teams. So, my team and I on a daily, weekly basis are a pretty good pulse of what's going on in the labor market in your world and my world. So we're talking to both millennial and Gen Zers, as well as established Gen Xers and later career baby boomers. So we're getting tales from the battlefield across the board. So we're a pretty good pulpit in terms of gathering the information and then having a pretty decent idea of what the trend lines are.
So we're seeing tech companies, the Magnificent Seven and so on, making some cuts in areas, but actually then hiring in other areas. So they're sort of rationalizing their sales force or their employment force, beefing up in AI maybe, and cutting back in some other areas, some product areas perhaps. And in the media, we're looking at margins and ad spending constricting maybe, and that drives a lot of hiring and restructuring. And as many had hoped in the media side, that there'd be a friendlier policy environment for consolidation, M&A, which has had its ups and downs, but maybe we're headed for some ups now in 26. So as companies prepare for M&A, they look to clean up their balance sheets and the margins, and so that affects people a lot of times. Once those transactions go through, maybe hiring starts up again. But you're seeing some promising signs. I mean, so there's a lot of both seasoned executives that can really help lead a company, which is where you specialize. And then, like you were saying, some of the younger professionals that are looking for a place to plug in. So the senior people, when I talk to them, it's like, I've got a lot to offer. I just, where do I offer from now? It's a little bit confusing. And then the younger people, there's no jobs for me. AI's, made my future irrelevant. So you work with those people, both, trying to find positions and companies trying to find those people with a good match. What do you see going on there? Where are we, and what do you think is going to happen over the course of the year?
It's a very interesting time, and I think if you split things into maybe two buckets, you have the traditional media companies, the legacy media companies that have digital or ad tech components, and then you have the standalone SaaS data, ad tech, martech companies. So put them in two buckets, right? So if we're looking at the legacy companies, what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months is consolidation, reduction in headcount, hiring back key individuals who maybe could take on two roles, or eliminating one role and giving the other person more money, but double the responsibility and double the workload, looking for key individual contributors on the sales side who bring quote unquote a book of business in a local market environment. A lot of media companies are still willing to hire up in a local market if someone can pay for themselves in short order. So doing more with less is probably a good way to sum up that sector or that portion of the marketplace. Far too many sad stories of really good people in the prime of their career who have been let go, not for performance, not through anything in terms of personality issues with their boss, just consolidation and reduction in headcount. So sometimes you have the highest salary. It doesn't matter if you have the best performance, but companies are just looking to maybe take a little less on the numbers just to get off your salary off their books. The standalone companies, shall we call them, the startups, the growth, the private equity backed companies, they still have some of the same pressures, but we're seeing more adds to staff on that side as opposed to replacements or opposed to reductions in force and consolidating roles. So it's two different marketplaces within our world. I will say last year, overall, our revenue numbers as an organization were up versus 2024, but we did fewer searches. So what we saw was that salaries had crept up, and we can talk about that and what some of the trends lines are there later on, but not more roles. So we were filling, we get paid based on percentage of base salary. So we track what our average, salary that we place is, and it was up about 20% year over the previous year.
Oh, wow.
Yep. But this year, the good news is Q1, we've seen a very meaningful uptick in new recs coming in, both from existing clients, established clients, and new clients. And a good chunk of those are not replacements. They're not poor performers. They're not even resignations. They're new adds to staff. So I'm an optimist by nature. I'm also a pragmatist, but I do see more hires this year that are growth hires, shall we call them, than replacement or consolidation hires.
Well, that's good to hear. And yeah, I guess these companies are making a bet on where the marketplace is going to go because, day to day it changes so much. It gets a bit tenuous trying to, place a bet and then see it blow up, the next day, and then come back and be a solid bet 2 days later. Not for the faint of heart. So you're talking about two segments. I've also been hearing about kind of no hire, no fire companies that maybe aren't part of an acquisition discussion on either end of it. They're just trying to hunker down and get through, this period until there's more certainty and they figure out what they want to do. Maybe the margins are okay, the revenues are okay, they've got I don't want to say an unexciting product, but something that dependably sells and people are going to keep up with, and they're just trying to keep their heads low to get through a period, and then decide, okay, is there an opportunity for us to do something now? Can we extend? Can we scale? Is that no hire, no fire? Is that kind of a third segment you see, or maybe not?
I think that's one of the things you're going to have to circle back more towards the spring, because what some people don't realize is there's a certain amount of seasonality in hiring. We always talk about seasonality in retail and Christmas hiring, but in corporate America, very few CEOs, presidents, unit leaders go into a new year and say, let's just kind of float as we are. Everyone comes back. There's pressures from private equity, there's pressures from Wall Street. Growth is always, the key, the key thing everyone's pushing towards. So one way to get growth is to hire. So we always see a big uptick Q1, new recs, new hires. Then that's where the kind of the wheat and the chaff are separated. In the spring and summer, a lot of companies do hunker down, as you say. And then after the summer, lulls with vacations and school out, believe it or not, early fall becomes another hot time when companies want to get hires in before you get to the holidays and things completely shut down. So there's two big crests, so to speak. It's usually beginning of Q1, and then around September, early October. And then, then you can kind of see who's doing well and who's struggling when you get into late spring, early summer. If a company is calling us or we're calling them and they're open at that time, it's usually around positive for first quarter numbers, some sort of investment that's given them additional capital. But then companies that are struggling will tell us we're holding tight until the fall, or maybe even until Q1 and 27. So I think, everyone's a wide-eyed optimist in Q1. After the first two touchdowns have been scored against you and you're down 14 points in the second quarter, maybe there's a few less hires that come in spring and summer.
Oh man, you're killing me. I'm a Patriots fan. Don't use that metaphor.
6 more months and you'll be talking about them again.
Exactly. I think so. Let's sort of jump into the maelstrom here a bit. So from the perspective of being in the being hired game, if you're looking to find that person, there's a lot of seasoned people out there that have great track records. They're had a high salary, so they got, when you do the sort in Excel, it's like, okay, those 3 people, and other than the salary rewarding career achievements, maybe no particular reason. It's just that's the rule of the day. So those people are good, but they're sidelined or on the bench. And then there's a lot of other people that go deeper that maybe aren't as prominent, as easy to find in searches for firms like yours. Now, when you're a person looking for a position, you're talking probably to an AI bot more so than a person. And if it's a person, it's probably an HR person, not a person in a functional area. So from a candidate's perspective, companies have trouble, I suppose, finding who is a good crop of candidates for us to look at. And we don't know how to find them. We can do things on LinkedIn or various job boards and use AI to help screen them. But it seems like that creates an opportunity for you, in companies like yours to say, yeah, we can use those tools, but we also know the players, we know the industry. And you did a post on LinkedIn that I thought was really insightful, likening this to Battle Royale and the hiring games, where it's like, so our little company, we've looked for people and we've done some outreach working with you and LinkedIn and some other platforms. And, we get hundreds of people back. It's like, what are we supposed to do with this? How do we sort through all these people? So talk a bit about that post that you did on the hiring games and, how do you get above random selection to just start talking to people and see if there's a match between what they can bring to your company and what you think you need?
Happy to do. Let me give you an anecdotal example of what a lot of candidates are going through today with AI and all of the volume that's out there. So we recently had a director of customer success search for a SaaS client of ours, and they were looking for someone who could lead managers and individual contributors, and it was a growth company, and it was an ad staff, and I'm pretty decent at my writing, and I put a ad on LinkedIn, and went through our database and referrals, and we got about 500 applicants off of LinkedIn, which was an incredibly high number. And usually when we post something on LinkedIn, I'll say 90% of the candidates are not appropriate, right? Some are good for other things, but some are just, it's free to apply, right? So why not throw your hat in? You never know. I would say that over half had the requisite skill set to be considered for the job. So, it was daunting for us because there was just such volume. And then there was the referrals we were getting and the people in our database and our network and all the different things. So long story short, I personally interviewed about 15 of the candidates, and then we got about 8 of them interviews. And to a person, I always ask, like, how are you finding the job market to good candidates? Because I want to know, I want to hear what their stories are. And all 8 of the candidates felt beaten down. These were all good people, mid-career, right amount of skill set, right amount of experience. They were talking about how so much is automated. They don't even get a call. They don't get a personalized email. They fall through the ether in terms of once they have a intake email exchange. And so for us having one-on-one conversations, preparing them for their interviews, they were just grateful to actually talk to somebody who could give them information about the company and to get them prepared and make them feel personalized to a degree. So for anybody who's out there going through this process, AI technology is a double-edged sword in almost every part of the business community today. And in terms of job seeking, it's a lot of downside, and you do become commoditized, and the human element, it has been removed to a large degree, which is really the nexus for that article, right? For a good person, or even a person who doesn't have a great background, it doesn't matter. It feels like a gauntlet, right? You are going through a never-ending series of quests to get a elusive job offer. There's ghost jobs out there, which have been highlighted in the Wall Street Journal, where 30 to 40% of all online ads are ghost jobs, where companies are just looking to warehouse resumes and profiles in case they get something down the road. So beyond an impersonalized, daunting interview process for real jobs, you've got nearly half of the jobs that are out there that don't even exist. So I wanted to put an article out there that just gave a neat comparison to a movie many of us have watched that talked about a strong woman in survival mode, and the game rules constantly changed until she got to the end, and the candidates and what they were going through on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's tough, boy. And I guess we're getting to a point now where it's my bot talks to your bot. So the person trying to get hired, it's like, well, I've got a little agent script I'm running here, and the hiring company. So it's like, the Python scripts talk to each other through some sort of AI platform, and maybe they go out to lunch together. I don't know. So one of the things that you mentioned in the hiring process, like getting 500, on the one hand, it's like, wow, that's great. What a great pool to potentially pick from. I suppose the flip side of the ghost jobs is probably this ghost resumes. It's like people doing a bunch. I mean, it could even be competitors floating things like that to see, who's going to respond to it, and who's, oh my gosh, so my brand B, my big competitor, I posted these jobs, and their availabilities, and they're trying to hire all these people, so they're growing in this area. We better grow in this area. I suppose that's another way to get some competitive intelligence. But you also talk about the elimination mindset. So if you surface, say, 500 candidates, you somehow have to go through that, with AI tools, looking for qualifications, credentials, experience, and somehow you have to validate that, and then maybe bubble that up to the 15 or so candidates that you want to personally interview, and half dozen 8 you want to pass on to your clients. For the elimination mindset, when you speak to that notion, that's the idea of, we need to go from 500 to 20. So let's just cut a bunch of people out, versus I guess a little bit the inverse. There's diamonds in the rough, or actual diamonds. How do we surface those? So rather than eliminate, we want to, prioritize and discover the people most likely to be big contributors to our company. How do you deal with that elimination mindset?
Well, there's 2 issues at play here, right? First of all, there is the volume. companies do have to make decisions, and I understand that, and they do have to have processes in place that lead them to culling the list of applicable candidates down to an acceptable number. You don't want your hiring managers and your executives wasting 20 hours a week interviewing 15 candidates, when if you had 5 good ones, that would be more than enough to kind of have a good cross section. So I do understand that there is a goal here, and saving time is a big part of it, which is one of our value adds, is that we can save that time for our clients. But there's a broader issue in that some companies, I feel like they just look for a reason not to hire someone instead of finding the reason to be attracted to someone. There's so many parallels to dating, right? Like the dating apps, when people who are single and they talk about, I'm on all these dating apps and it's, all the no's, and it's like, you can find a reason not to like someone, right? Like that's pretty easy. You can have a list of criteria that is insurmountable for mortal man or woman to meet. And in hiring, it's the same. Some companies put the barrier so high that roles stay open for 3 months, 6 months. God, I've heard 18 months even. It's not a search I've ever done, but I've had clients tell me, or companies tell me, hey, this role's been open for 15 months. I don't want to work on that, because there's a reason internally that you haven't found someone, and your process is probably part of it. So, breaking it down, candidates have to understand that companies do have to narrow what is sometimes a large list of prospects down to an acceptable number to do first rounds. But the flip side is companies need to find a reason to be attracted to candidates, get them through the process quickly and efficiently, and make a decision, yes or no.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on a couple of things on those excellent insights you just shared. Finding a reason, and then that notion of time, the time dimension. So finding a reason is a hard thing to do for some candidates, because you have your job description, and obviously everyone's going to match it perfectly in their response using AI tools and their own imagination. But sometimes I imagine you'll be part of a process where someone will take a dare and answer back and say, I know this is what you're looking for, but I can also do this. And the company may say, that's actually interesting. This is not the standard vanilla answer saying you can do everything we asked for. You're actually suggesting something different. We hadn't thought about that. And that adds to the role that we had conceived to hire for. And we want to talk to you, and maybe we'll change the role to accommodate your knowledge, experience, relationship network. Do you see much of that happening, or is it pretty much, here's 8 things we're looking for? Amazing. Those are the 8 things I have.
Well, it depends on the relationship we have with the company and who it's with, right?
Yeah.
The number one question I try to ask is, how can this person move the needle for you? How can this person make an impact 6 months, 12 months? So if they say this person can come in and hunt new business, tier 2, tier 3 agencies, and I find a person who's got a Rolodex of great tier 2, 3 agencies and built it from scratch and has great, that person can move the needle. So even if their background maybe doesn't fit in other areas, I would go back to that client of mine and say, look, you want somebody who's going to help you win 20 new agencies in 27. This person did it at their last job without a lot of resources. Their resume may not line up in terms of either location or previous background, or it just doesn't look 100% spot on, but they can do the function that you want the hire to accomplish. So, for me, it's the why of the hire, and that then gives me more latitude. But if I'm working with HR and they're very structured in their approach and the must-haves, and and it's a long list, sometimes my hands are tied and I've got to go for the cookie cutter resume.
Right. Well, I have to say, it sounds like you have the ability to offer a lot of value added by going beneath, kind of the bullet points and seeing the person and what they might bring to it, and then offering counsel back to your clients. This is the role you've specified, but here are the kind of people that are out there, and given what you're trying to accomplish, are you willing to accommodate a slightly different view of a person that could probably add, potentially more value to your company? So just kind of another value add to get you in the mix, to help people make that good match.
Well, from a candidate perspective, Rick, we typically prep almost every candidate for every interview that goes out the door. So it's a lot of one-on-ones. It's part of our secret sauce and what we do, right? And one of the things I always tell a candidate to expect, there's 2 questions you're almost always going to get, regardless of position, regardless of company, right? Like the first question is, what do you know about us? So the interviewer is trying to make sure you did a little due diligence, a little homework. You can articulate who they are. If nothing else, that you went to the website and read a few tidbits to give a bullet point, right? Then the $1 million question you get is, tell me about yourself, Rick. And what that really means is, and I equate it to a politician's opening statement where they get 2 minutes to make that opening statement to the audience before the questions start flying. So I tell candidates, that opening statement is your present, your past, and your future. Tell me about yourself, Rick. Well, currently I am an executive director of a major consulting firm that focuses in on the media space. We've achieved 42% year over year increase in viewership. What you're doing today. The past, how you got there, maybe a little bit of a personal narrative of how you got into the industry you're in and how you got to the role. And then the future, what the crux is how what you're hoping to accomplish personally aligns with the goal of the hire. Well, I'm looking for a high growth media company that values a seasoned pontificator like myself to talk about trend lines in the space, in a consultative environment. And I feel like what you all are looking for really lines up with what I'm looking to do. So for any candidate that's going out on an interview, you have to know your present, your past, and your future, and how it lines up with the goals of the role that you're interviewing for.
Wow, that sounds really powerful. Really good advice. And I can see how that would be very impactful for people. Let me switch to a couple of specifics. Time, and then I guess compensation, what kinds of packages and how they're structured and so on. So for time, you had mentioned sometimes the hiring process takes a long time. Certainly takes a long time from the perspective of the candidates, but probably also for the companies. I mean, they want to move on. So I mean, typically the higher the position in leadership, I guess the longer it takes to fill and to be hired if you're on the other side of it. And I used to hear, if you're kind of a senior leader, it may be at least 6 months. If you leave one position for whatever reason before you find your next position, and if you're a more junior person, depending upon where you are, what your skill set is, and your experience and so on, and it could be somewhere in a 3 to 6 months time frame. But it seems like those timelines are getting longer. Is that right? Do you think right now in the market?
It depends would be the best answer, right? So some of that is beholden onto the individual. I tell individuals who are in job search, you need to think like a marketer. The days of reacting as opposed to being proactive are long gone. You're not waiting for something somewhere, on a job board or a microsite to pop up that fits. You are connecting to people in your network. You are finding hiring authorities at companies you would be interested in. Find 100 companies that might fit your background and outbound message to the revenue leaders if you're in revenue, the marketing leaders if you're in marketing, the operations leader if you're in operations. That'll cut your timeline down. Yes, if you're a president, if you're a CRO, if you're a chief digital officer, your timeline is going to be longer than if you're an individual contributor or you're a BDR, SDR, where people get hired in a week. But some of that is up to you. Right. It just depends how aggressive you are. If you treat it like a full-time job, you can cut that timeline in half. Obviously there's always extenuating circumstances where you're willing to relocate to. Are you open to not work from home? What your salary requirements are? I mean, if you're very rigid, your timeline will be longer. But if you're flexible and you're proactive, certainly you can get back to work much quicker.
And then, so you mentioned salary. That was another place I wanted to touch base on. If you're in sales or some sort of incentive, driven career path, typically, base, commission, incentives, things like that. So I was wondering how compensation structures are evolving, and then compensation levels. I mean, we've talked about how, well, let's just take the top 5 paid people and look at those positions. Can we do with different salary levels because they're trying to cut our costs? So are people needing to accept smaller salaries at the top levels, and are compensation packages becoming more base plus some sort of incentive or variable component? Do you see changes there? Or are they still pretty traditional sales? It's maybe base plus commission. If you're not in sales, it's base plus KPIs and bonuses or performance or something.
So I'll split this up into 2 levels: the individual contributors and then leadership, whether that's frontline sales, marketing leadership, or all the way up the org chart. So I've seen a steady increase, account manager salaries, business development reps, SDRs, local market sellers, regional sellers, pretty good lift. There's a lot of competition for scrappy hunters who can pay for themselves, and companies have gone up from paying, not that long ago, 50 grand on a base salary to 70, 80, $90,000 even for local market roles with some companies. So there's been a nice lift there, and the hiring remains pretty consistent. I mean, we're not going to see the days like we used to where, Yodel rolled out and they put 20 sales reps, or City Search had 20 sales reps. I mean, it's a little more targeted and structured and less volume. But if you're getting those jobs, the base pay, it's 50-50 typically. So if you're coming in at 70 and you hit your numbers, you can make 150 grand your first year once you get through training and you're fully up and running. So it's been good for people in those roles and pretty consistent. I think when you get into leadership, especially if you've been doing something for 10, 20 years, you move around a little bit, you get an increase. You stay and you do well and you get an increase. Companies, as we said, are looking to do more with less, and they're certainly looking to cut costs, and cutting executive sales directors, marketing directors, account management, lead salaries. It's gotten more compressed, right? The days of moving across the street to work for a legacy media company and getting a 50% increase. I mean, I don't see that nearly as much. Companies are very cost conscious on their leadership positions, and there are fewer seats than there were even 5-6 years ago.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So for 26, you're kind of optimistic that there'll be more hirings, and some of the people that have been kind of sidelined, as you're saying, it depends on their personal approach, how aggressive they are, and how successful they are at positioning themselves from a marketing perspective. But maybe things will look a little bit better, both on the hiring side and the being hired side. So in media and tech, that sounds good. Coming back to the base comp, I wanted to ask about that. So I get asked this question fairly frequently, particularly probably in sales, where you say it's typically maybe 50-50 base plus some sort of incentive commissions or whatever. And I get asked the question, are we better off having more sellers that we can afford with a smaller base and more upside? Or do we attract I guess, more successful candidate by paying a bit more base? So in other words, if we pay more in the base, are we going to get better, more effective sellers? So we maybe have fewer sellers. We're paying their base higher, but they're going to drive more overall revenue. So we'll have 7 sellers instead of 10, but these are better qualified, better experienced, more successful sellers. Do you see that dialogue or that dynamic happening?
Yeah, so you almost have to look at it like as an NFL or an NBA salary cap, right? You can't pay everybody on your team all-star money, or you'll be over the salary cap. But you have a goal, you have a revenue goal. So how do we get there? So I think having done this and seen all kinds of things work and all kinds of things fail, my advice would be to, if you could find somebody in your market who has a great track record, who has great relationships, it's worth paying them more, right? Pay that one person more, but then roll the dice on 2 or 3 people who come outside of your industry. It doesn't have to be a kid out of school. It could be a somewhat seasoned local market sales rep who's doing consultative sales outside of the media landscape. If you have good product training and development, and that person is motivated to make money and knows how to close business and has a track record of hitting quota, and some sort of a solution consultative sale that aligns, take a shot. You're not going to pay that person as much as you're going to pay your seasoned industry vet. But you don't have to put all your eggs in the basket of 3 kids coming out who have never done sales. So being open, that goes back to being open to different backgrounds. You maybe have 2 tiers in terms of your compensation models, and invest in an all-star. You get somebody who's proven and hungry still and has president's clubs in their back pocket and isn't quite happy where they are or the current landscape of their company. Give them a raise to come over and then make up for it by taking a shot on 3 or 4 junior or non-industry people.
I like that. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure you have experience with that and have seen it work. So I feel like I've picked your brain a lot. I really appreciate this conversation. Great. And is there any other things that you would like to bring up before we close out?
To the company's hiring. So, candidates will tell us a lot of things that frustrate them. or please them, right? Almost every candidate we talk to and every survey you see, candidates are not happy with interview processes, right? Among the complaints, too many rounds, too many stakeholders.
Right.
You shouldn't have your director of operations maybe interviewing for a local market sales rep in Tampa. Make it germane to the hire, right? Only have the cooks who are going to be in the kitchen serving the dish. Don't have so many people and taking up so much time.
Right.
And be straightforward with your process, right? One of the questions I ask my clients is how many interviews, how much time? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that's reasonable. 3 interviews, that's reasonable. Intro interview, follow up with the manager, a pitch, a presentation, a 30, 60, 90, maybe a final 4th interview with the CEO if it's a higher level role. Understandable and manageable. When companies start adding layers, it's like running a 100-meter hurdle race and there's a man putting an extra hurdle in as you're running. I mean, you lose your stride. And good people will have options. So, companies sometimes think, oh, this is a complete employer's market. And for some roles it is, for some industries it is, but good people will always have multiple options. And if you find them on your own, some other recruiter found them on their own. If I find them, I know they're typically interviewing other places. So I always try and keep that state of urgency and being transparent with the candidates. But the good news is a lot of candidates will choose a company not strictly on compensation or brand identity. It'll be the warm fuzzies they get through the process. And companies that turn it from strictly an about you process to why you should come to work for us do best, right? Yeah. You need to figure out if that person fits your needs, but then why would I want to come over to your company? If you have a peer that's really happy to this role that you're hiring, get that person on a Zoom and say, hey, look, this isn't even an interview. This is about us putting you in front of somebody who's in a comparable role. So, it's sales, right? We're all in sales. Like, you need to be selling that person on why they should come over versus saying you need to do 10 things to get an offer and you'd be lucky to get it. So there's a mindset there that doesn't cost anything. It's just maybe changing your interview paradigm a little bit and your structure, and it'll net you more acceptances and less turndowns, even if you don't have the highest compensation model. So companies that have that right mindset and that warm fuzzies, even a little bit, it goes a long way.
I love that. It really sets up the engagement process to find a better match. I mean, you going beyond just the topical surface things into, is this really a good, culture or personality fit? I want to be there and you want me there. So it's like, okay, we're starting a beautiful relationship here.
And along those lines, you have to think about, and I ask my clients this too, like if I'm talking to a great prospect for BIA, what would you want me to tell them about your organization that would get them excited, right? Like, are you doing innovative research? Or are you talking to all these companies that are leaning into AI and gaining amazing insights? I mean, like, what is it that's going to get someone excited beyond, it pays $125,000, you get 3 weeks vacation and your boss is a good person. Like, that's very boilerplate. Like, give me something. And the flip, and if you're doing it directly, know what's going to get somebody excited. So if you have that selling mindset, it goes a long way.
Absolutely. Robert, I always love our conversations, and I've loved our association personally and between our companies over the years. Thank you so much for being with us here today. And anytime. For our audience, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being with us. If you have any questions for Robert, get back to us at BIA. We'll make sure that Robert gets them, or of course, go to Robert directly. And what's a good way for people to get in touch with you, Robert?
Robert at HawthorneSearch.com, or find me on LinkedIn, Robert Hawthorne, President, Hawthorne Search.
That's great. Thank you again, everybody. We appreciate your supporting our podcast program. If you have ideas for topics or guests, please let us know. We try to keep these interesting and relevant and hopefully helpful to what you're trying to do day to day in business. Robert, thanks again. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rick.
Thanks for tuning in to the BIA Leading Local Insights podcast. Stay a part of our community by subscribing so you never miss an episode. And we want to hear from you. What topics do you want us to dive into next? Email your ideas to podcast@bia.com.